Just don't F me up.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome if it's your first time, and welcome back if it's not. Welcome to the shit show. Just Don't F Them Up podcast. We're back. We're back at it again. We have another awesome guest on with us today.
I don't know how we are pulling these guests off. We have like the creme de la creme with us today. A unicorn therapist. That's what we call these kind of therapists in our community, a unicorn therapist. This is Megan Cunningham. She's a licensed professional clinical counselor. She is the owner of Cunningham Behavioral Health in Rochester. She also does telehealth services. And the reason she is a unicorn is because she works with teens and kids with eating disorder behaviors and anxiety and OCD. And this is, I would imagine post-pandemic, you're seeing perhaps an increase in behaviors. Just from what I've read, I've seen like OCD is, the diagnoses are increasing anyway. And the anxiety post-pandemic. Like, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, all of those areas, there was an increase in prevalence. And gosh, the eating piece is probably the more alarming one, even so, just because kids were home, a lot, and there was added stress, and structure and routines were different. Kids weren't getting their built-in lunch at school, and parents were still working, and kind of tons of kids, I think, just unintentionally got off track with their eating and behaviors around that, which is already just vulnerable when you're kids anyways. And then, anxiety, OCD, also very much common in the COVID pandemic time.
Yeah. Can we start with kind of like the basics of like, what is an eating disorder and what's disordered eating?
Yeah, that's a great question. So disordered eating, again, it's going to be a spectrum like anything where behaviors start to come up that are just outside of normalized eating. So that could be, increased focus on like dieting behaviors or just missing meals for a variety of reasons. I would say with kids and teens, appetite changes, getting up early, not feeling super hungry. Oh, I'll just miss breakfast. A lot of those behaviors kind of emerge unintentionally for most people. And then sometimes it's, related to other things, like if they're on a medicine that suppresses appetite, if they're going through a lot of stress or changes that can influence eating. If parents are busy and aren't there to prepare meals, they might just not eat as much as they normally would. And then what kind of ends up happening, I would say for the majority of youth, is that they kind of back into an eating disorder unintentionally, where they've now lost a bit of weight, or even if they haven't lost weight, they haven't gained enough to stay on their growth curve, and they keep growing taller and puberty hits and they're supposed to gain a bunch of weight and they just haven't. And then oops, now I'm feeling different. I'm having more anxiety and depressive symptoms. And yep, a lot of that is because I'm malnourished and didn't even realize it. And then all of the symptoms that go along with an eating disorder do kind of emerge along with that weight loss. So I would say that's probably the most common, where it's kind of an unintentional. It's not typically what you'd see on movies of, I want to be super thin and going to go on this crash diet. That's less likely than a lot of the other reasons why eating difficulties start.
Wow. What about in like little kids?
Yeah, little kids, picky eating is a super common thing where, to some degree, picky eating is a normal kind of developmental shift. But for some kids, if they're not getting exposure to different foods, that can become kind of a tricky cycle to get out of. And that could become a bit more avoidant in nature. And then I also think that kids who have allergies develop maybe some fears around eating, and then, accidentally limit their food a bit too much. And then younger kids who have anxiety are also more prone to being fearful around eating. Quite common one is kids who are afraid of vomiting or, have phobias around food. They become pretty selective about the foods that they're eating. And then again, didn't even realize it. And parents, of course, didn't notice that now we're off track with our growth. And it's much harder to then correct once that's happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of like the vomiting thing. Like
Yeah.
when you said that, I was like, it's like being pregnant. Everything you have to like be aware of how it's gonna taste if it comes back up.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or just fears around like, is this food going to make me sick? Or I ate this food once and didn't feel well. Or yeah. Yeah. A lot of really unique intricacies with eating. And yeah. And just how that can shift as the child grows and gets older. And then puberty is probably the main, like, where it starts to become more noticeable to the family, to doctors, just because their growth is pretty, affected by that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is it a concern if their growth or their weight gain or however like physically we're tracking that isn't off, but like could they still be having other things, other symptoms because of the eating and the anxiety piece of it? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's some concerns of, kids who are like, overeating, or there's a subjective, binge eating concern where, maybe they've had a weight gain associated with that, and that causes concern for parents and doctors. But almost always there are other behaviors woven into that, like, restricting earlier in the day and then binging in the evening is an example. So they might not have weight loss because they're making up that food intake later in the day, but the distress around the food and eating is still there. And the main kind of treatment intervention is we have to normalize eating behaviors so that the body can have predictability with the amount of nourishment that it gets. And then, of course, if there's a need to gain weight, we have to modify eating temporarily to get the amount of food needed to regain. And like something that's really interesting for anyone who wants to learn more about this, there is a famous study called the Minnesota Starvation Study. It was actually conducted in Minnesota, and this was done kind of around the World War time, where they were wanting to examine the effects of starvation on soldiers and individuals who didn't have access to as much food.
Wow.
So they took these were kind of young adult men who volunteered to be in this study, and these were healthy, no medical concerns, no history of eating disorders or psychiatric concerns. And the purpose of the study was to limit food intake slightly, not significantly. So I think it ended up maybe being around like 500 calories a day less than what they would typically eat. Okay. And they observed, what happens when people aren't eating as much as their bodies need and are used to. And the effects were so significant that this is why the study became so well known in the community, where these men developed anxiousness, rigidity. They were overly concerned about food and their body appearance. They became pretty depressed and agitated. They had a hard time correcting their behaviors, and kind of, just overall effects on functioning were pretty clear. Their sex drive went down. There was one incident of, this man like becoming somewhat psychotic and started hearing and seeing things. And so,
my gosh,
right. Like it was significant, like changes, and not only their physical, health and well-being, but more notably, like the emotional side of things was really impaired. And then they found that these men who had no history of dieting or body concerns developed preoccupation with how they looked, how much they weighed, what they ate, foods being wrong or bad. And those symptoms were very much embedded in not eating enough. Versus the opposite, which most people think, I want to diet and lose weight, so then I'll, change my eating. Where nope, it was the opposite. Like the symptom was after the fact that they had already eaten less and lost weight. And then they refed these men back to, what they needed and what they normally would eat. And pretty much all of the symptoms like went away just because their brain encouraged. Yeah. So it was such a cool study. And that's exactly what I see in my practice all the time is teens and kids will present with my child is so much more anxious, or, they can't focus in school. Their grades have dropped. They seem depressed and withdrawn. And because I treat eating disorders, I always ask about eating and growth, and yep, look at the growth chart. They were in the 70th percentile, and now we're in they're in the 50th.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a big reason why you're seeing a lot of these changes in their temperament and their mood and behavior. And then I refeed them and we do good treatment. And then, oh, my kid's back. Their mood is better. They're engaged. Their energy is better. They're eating more normally. They're not as worried about their body and how they look. And so that is such a unique dynamic. And one of my favorite parts of treatment is seeing the child become, who they really are, and not so impaired by malnourishment. Yeah.
That's beautiful. This experiment it's only 500 calories.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot, especially but I think that is also why eating on a regular schedule in a normalized way is so important, because it doesn't take much for our brain to perceive starvation. So think of being hangry, right?
I think about that all the time.
Right. If I eat a meal, I get agitated and irritable. And that's kind of what happens, but full blown, where the body is really smart and it doesn't understand these nuances. So all it perceives is, I used to be getting this amount of food and now I'm getting this. It must mean that we're in a famine and there's not enough food available. And so now I need to compensate for that. And, I need to slow down digestion. And unfortunately, that makes people feel full too early, or it takes them a while to have an appetite, because the body's trying to make sense. If you don't have food, what's the point of making you feel super hungry?
Right.
And, so the body does a really good job biologically with that, but unfortunately that's what makes it so hard then for someone to correct it on their own, because their body doesn't think there's enough food, so it's not going to cue them correctly to eat the amount they actually need. And it doesn't take much for that to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, only 500 calories. And if you're a growing kid,
yeah, totally.
That is that's a major effect.
Yeah, yeah.
The way you're describing it too, though. So I have some clients in eating disorder, kind of remission, but still something to track. And it's with the Ozempic and Manjaro and those coming out, how much that is on their mind. That if I were to start using symptoms again, I could just go get this injectable. And the studies, and I'm not meaning to dog these medications because they are very effective for the people that need them, who it is prescribed for. I'm noticing I feel, because I don't know that much about it, I feel concerned about my eating disorder clients using those. And maybe it's harder for kids and teens to get their hands on an injectable. Let's hope.
I would hope, yes.
But no, I think describing that digestion slows down, that's what those shots do, is slows down your digestion and you're not hungry anymore. And then all of a sudden you're losing a lot of weight very quickly.
Yep. Yeah. There's a huge risk, I think, in terms of the effects that has. And the reality is, any diet, right, is there's typically a rebound effect where, yes, you can lose weight. But the second that, you're not using the drug, or if you can't maintain restrictive dieting forever, that yo-yo dieting effect where your body then will end up regaining that weight almost always, and oftentimes more. And they've done studies about this, that, people who diet versus people that don't, calorie count or track, individuals who diet over years end up gaining more than if they didn't diet at all. And that's because the body is trying to support health long term. So if you're supposed to be, if you're supposed to be in this range of your genetically determined weight, and that might not align with our societal standards of what beauty is. So if you're meant to be in a larger body, for example, and you lose weight, you're technically underweight, and then your body thinks it's not getting enough food. So then when the diet ultimately fails and you regain that weight back, the body often will do something called overshooting, where it will think, ooh, I hope there's not another famine, but just in case there is, we better increase weight to protect this person from future weight loss.
Oh,
So yes, and just the effects on behavior around food, right? Like dieting leads to a lot of obsessiveness around food and rigidity, and um, those behaviors can unintentionally make it hard to, maintain the healthy weight the person needs.
that is so
Wow.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the hormonal part, like especially for like kids and teens you're working with, and hormones play such a huge role. And food communicates with our body and it affects our like cortisol levels, and that is going to communicate with our hormones. Like, how big of an effect does that have on?
Yeah, I would say like most kids who are suffering from an eating disorder just present pretty like pretty depressed and anxious. So they might be, have less interest in things, less energy. Their sleep is really just disrupted as well. They might be a lot more irritable and agitated. And so of course, like it's common that these individuals do get assessed and for depression, but when really it's a lot of it could simply just be because they're struggling with an active eating disorder. Yeah. And then, teens who are really active is a whole nother thing, right? Where, kids and teens who are active in sports, and that's another way to kind of accidentally back into an eating disorder where they might not know that they have to eat more on the days they're really active. And yeah, so there's a lot of factors. And I think why it's just so common for kids who should always be growing and gaining weight. It doesn't take much for them to stall out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too, like, what's the line between, or how do we know where the line is between picky eating
Mm.
and like disordered eating?
Yeah. So I would say, like the most important thing is that their weight stays on the same trajectory that, historically they have been. So like if you look at a growth chart, there's different percentiles, right? And the percentile doesn't matter. Kids can be very healthy in the 5th percentile. Kids can be healthy in the 95th percentile. That is a genetically determined, like your body likes to be in a certain range and it will work hard to stay within that range. So regardless of where the child falls on their growth chart, the most important thing is that they stay pretty steadily along that same percentile. So it should trend, upward and steady. So any deviations in that, so any dips below that we're at risk. So the main thing is we need to increase their eating and high fat, high calorie foods to get them back to that. Now, if they're steady on the growth chart, that's great. We're not working against health risk that way, but it's more of the behavioral component of helping them develop a balanced, relaxed relationship with food and eating. So, picky eating, we want your preferences are okay, but we sometimes need to try foods multiple times to determine whether we actually like them or not. And sometimes we also just eat things, even if we don't love them, because we need variety in our foods. And so there's so many different ways that, picky eating can be pretty mild, and then it can get pretty significant, like ARFID and, avoidant restrictive eating. So, interventions will differ based on what the concerns are. But as parents, I think, continuing to set expectations for, we have to try foods, even if we don't think we'll like them, we have to try them, because part of it is, can you try this food and handle it? If you don't love the texture, if you don't love the taste, could you still eat it? Because there's going to be lots of times going to a friend's house, going to an after school or, an after sporting event activity or dinner, going to a wedding where we don't get to always choose the foods. So we have to learn that I can eat different foods, even if I don't love them, or if they feel, they're not my favorite, or the favorite texture, things like that. And that only comes through practice and experience of exposing them to those types of things. So from a young age, like just introducing all different foods, encouraging all food groups, making sure that as parents, we're not forbidding any foods, or creating rules around foods. Like, this is a bad food, we shouldn't eat this, or, so just being mindful about how, as parents, we are speaking about food and encouraging flexibility and, normalized behaviors around food.
Interesting. I was reading something about that with like Halloween candy. There was kind of this push of like, don't restrict the Halloween candy, and don't, like, you're putting this idea of like you can only have one because it's so bad for you.
Sure. Yeah. I think, again, what's a normalized behavior with Halloween candy or candy in general? Like, it's probably not normal to like take a whole bag and like sit on the couch and watch shows for hours. Like, not normal, not balanced. But is it normal to enjoy a treat like each day and like in a way that feels intentional and balanced? Like, sure. And so as parents, you can, a lot of that is also modeling, like, out of these, this candy, like, could you pick two for today, or which are your two favorite for today? So, you're creating expectations to enjoy all foods, but you're also supporting and creating some structure around that too.
Yeah. Yeah, which we do with other foods too, right?
Yeah,
like even at dinner time, it's like I'm not taking 4 scoops of peas.
Right. Yes. And the reality is that most kids, I mean, just like when kids are babies, they needed like fatty milk to grow and develop their brain. So kids do need a higher fat, higher calorie diet than adults. And so if we project our own eating habits onto our kids, that might not be actually in their best interest. Where, so especially teenagers, because their brains are growing very rapidly, and any normal teenager is like gravitates toward like pizza, chips, like, because that's what their brain actually really does need more of. And so again, we want to encourage variety and eating at regular times and having snacks in between meals, and that setting them up for success with that eating routine.
Interesting.
Eating stuff just feels like such a big like mountain to climb with kids sometimes. Like, it's just like,
yes,
oh, there's so many things, and we want to make sure they're getting what they need, right? Because let me tell you, mine would be fine if I never had a vegetable in the house ever again in their whole entire lives. They'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
It's just, there's just so many things to consider, and I have one pretty picky eater, and so trying to get him to do anything is
and that's kind of what managing the behavior, right? Like, it's totally normal for kids to resist or to kind of evade. And this is true for like brushing your teeth or eating your vegetables, like anything, if there is a, kind of like we're stuck and we're not getting cooperation, like, kids, I think, do respond well to kind of having a plan of, if you can, every time you try a new food or every time you brush your teeth before bed, like, you can earn a point, and those can be for fun things. So having, sometimes having a reward system for specific behaviors that, any parent wants to improve cooperation around, that added structure can be really beneficial if it's done correctly. To enhance motivation when motivation might not be there at first.
Yes.
Yeah. What a nice way to say that. To enhance motivation when motivation might not be there initially. Bribing.
Bribing though, and that comes up sometimes. Bribing is when you are telling them, I will do this for you if you cooperate right now. A reward system is set up ahead of time. So they know the expectation and how to earn rewards. They can choose whether they do it or not. But yes, it's a fine line. Okay.
but one of them sounds psychologically more healthy and effective.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, I love my job, but I don't work unless I get paid. And I know that if I work, I get paid. So I'm motivated to do that. So we all are motivated by rewards in life and things that are tied to our efforts.
Yes.
That's a great, and this is making me think about this too with, historically eating disorders weren't always recognized appropriately by insurance companies. There was a huge case, that's how Anna Weston, her name kind of got more well known, is that her parents really fought for, I think they sued Blue Cross Blue Shield, because they wouldn't pay for a hospitalization stay. And she subsequently lost her life. And they ended up meeting with the Obama administration to make some changes with the healthcare system so that insurance was going to pay for like hospital stays for eating disorder clients. Like they would only do it if you had like depression or they weren't counting trigger warning suicidal ideation if it was just with an eating disorder. So,
Which is that's so just amazing, because eating disorders are the most deadly psychiatric illness, and really like calling it a psychiatric illness is to some not even that accurate, because when someone is, especially with like anorexia or where there's significant weight loss, that it is such a physical there are just such physical consequences to being underweight that it is for many nearly impossible for them to refeed themselves out of that. And so just because of the changes that happen in the body that make it so difficult for them to eat. So it's no one asks for an eating disorder. No one wants one.
no.
And that's it's so frustrating when there's barriers in place for accessing the right treatments.
I just Googled it. So Blue Cross Blue Shield is the correct insurance company. And I'm not going to edit that out because whatever, they're on my case anyway. So I think this sort of thing is important to talk about, because I don't know that people would otherwise know that, like, you as a clinician, as a patient, you have to fight to get coverage, even if you have something as life-threatening as an eating disorder.
Right. Yeah. And eating disorder treatment should trump everything else, right? Because like expecting someone to feel less depressed or less anxious when their body's malnourished is ridiculous. Like they can't. It's not, and it has nothing to do with their effort or willingness. It's just their brain doesn't care about managing emotions when it's not getting enough food. It's not essential for survival. So it's more important, it's more worried about the organs and everything else working. So it's silly. And I think unfortunately that happens a lot, where someone will be in therapy for years and not seeing much benefit with their mood or anxiety, and it's really because they're still malnourished or
and I'm wondering too what sort of connection you see with eating disorders and the anxiety and OCD piece, especially the OCD, the very particular cognitive rigidity you might see there.
Yeah. So a lot of times when even if individuals have a history, or they've always been kind of anxious or have struggled with OCD, like if there is eating, if there's eating disturbance or weight change, those symptoms are just going to escalate, right? So, one of the things that I think, just for all therapists and parents too, but mostly clinicians, is, just like we ask about sleep habits and, physical activity, like we really also should be assessing, like, what is your eating like each day? And if there's any mention of like, I avoid these foods, I I frequently skip breakfast or lunch, or any other kind of concerns related to that, we should definitely be looking at their growth chart. Because then we can say, okay, like this needs to be addressed in order to make progress with other things. And OCD in particular, OCD is, there's a lot of rigidity with OCD in terms of, needing things to be certain and just right. And so, rigidity is very common with people who aren't eating enough. And so you're going to just see more prevalence of that with it. And there's a lot of comorbidity between individuals who have OCD and individuals who have eating disorders too. So both, screening and doing a thorough assessment of what's contributing to what. And then I would defer treatment for anxiety and OCD until the eating is normalized and weight's been restored.
Okay.
So interesting, because I think with so many clients, they have eating behaviors, and then that's coming secondary as far as treatment goes to the depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm, like all of that is the target. But it sounds like we're doing it backwards. Like they should be doing the eating disorder treatment first, and then if they even still need
Exactly.
the other
Yes.
treatment, doing
Yep.
that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that just goes to just under, there's just unfortunately just a lack of training and education among our profession related to like what
Totally.
evidence-based
Mm.
practice and yeah, it's such a specialized area that it makes sense why it gets missed or why maybe the treatment isn't as effective as it could be.
Also,
Yeah.
though, like we all eat, like we all have to eat to sustain life. And it would be, I would guess it would be pretty normal if everyone has some level of disordered eating.
Yeah.
Even people who have like a most healthy, rigid diet, maybe they have a tough, a loss in their life. And
Yeah.
food becomes comforting. Like these things, like people, maybe it's not a diagnosable disorder, but we can all relate to some extent with
Right.
using food.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's comparable. I mean, sometimes I'll use the example of sleep, right? It's something all of us do, but there's varying degrees of
Yeah.
quality and like how effective is our sleep habit and like there's people who know like being on my phone right before bed, I don't get the best sleep, but I can function. Like I'm willing to take that consequence, right? And eating is the same way. Like there's people who can go through their whole life with insufficient eating behaviors, but if it's not affecting their functioning, if it's not interfering with their ability to fully participate in life, and it's not overly distressing to them, that's not necessarily an identified problem, right? It's the same with anxiety. Almost everyone understands at times what it feels like to be anxious, but how much is it interfering? How much is it limiting you from the life you want to live? So, for kids, yeah, there's tons of picky eaters that live a fulfilling life and it doesn't get in the way. That's not the problem. That's not what I would treat in my practice. But it's, is the picky eating now you only eat chicken nuggets and mac and cheese every day, and now we can't go to restaurants because they don't have exactly the type of mac and cheese you want? Or have you lost weight because you're only eating 5 things or are scared to eat foods? I mean, then yeah, like it becomes we need to get support for this and increase functioning again.
Yeah. That's I was wondering, like, what are things that parents can watch out for so that they know if they need to pursue care or not?
Oh, that's a great
Yeah.
question. I would say first and foremost, the most protective thing is having, this is true for adults too, but having your children eat 3 meals and at least 2 snacks on a pretty regular schedule every day. So breakfast, lunch, snack after school, dinner, and an evening snack. That's number one most important. Because if they're doing that, the risk of veering off track is just much less. And then the other thing is the variety. So making sure that, when they are eating meals and snacks, making sure that there's, at least 2 or 3 different food groups involved in that meal and snack. So, a Lunchable, probably not the most calorically beneficial lunch. So, having a sandwich with that. So like when they're eating, making sure that they're eating full amounts of food that have variety of all different food groups. And then anything related to when any observation of fears about food or your child or teenager stop no longer eating foods that they typically would have eaten, that those would also be maybe things to look into and monitor. And I think that is probably more likely to happen around the puberty teenage years, but at any age really. Like if you always really did enjoy my homemade cookies, but now you're saying you don't eat cookies, that's more of something we probably need to explore a bit.
Okay.
So those are the things to look out for. And we can do meals and snacks regularly. And is there anything else that, I mean, I'm just thinking of like, what if what if they won't eat a ton of things? Like, what if you're offering things for every meal and they just are like, yeah, no, I'm not. I don't want that.
I guess that would depend. Are they like how much variety are they eating? Will they eat some fruits or some vegetables, or even just if it's like 2 to 3, like that's still variety, especially for kids. But if it's pretty consistent refusal, and as a parent, I think we have pretty good intuitions about like recognize like their scope of eating has just become smaller and smaller and more limited. Then I would recommend kind of coming up with essentially a behavior plan of like, every day we have to try, one new food, or we have to try one fruit or one vegetable. And the goal is not that you like it. The goal is that you learn you can handle eating this food with normal behavior. So if you eat this green bean and your face and body act calm and confident and brave, you get a point. And once you get, 2 or 3 points, then, here's this little reward box you can pick something from, or you can get access to your iPad or whatever it is for the child that's motivating to them. And so the goal isn't that you have to eat this until you like it. The goal is that we're practicing variety and exposure. And we want that to be done in a pretty neutral way of, this is a challenge. Can you do the challenge? And if they can, they get rewards for that. If they refuse, then we would come up with a plan of, that's fine if you're not ready to do that, and you can hang out here and be bored until you are. And then let me know when you're ready. So I'm not going to fight you about that. I'm not going to try to convince you or shove it in your mouth. It's here. You know what the expectation is. Let me know when you're ready. And usually, that's a pretty effective approach. But again, as a parent, you'd want to decide if you're, able and willing to invest in that, because it will take some consistency and time as well. Yeah. And that's why people like me exist too, that, there's some nuances and you want that support. So if it's seeming to be difficult, finding a good provider who's familiar with these types of concerns can be really helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your opinion on dessert?
I love dessert.
Topic of conversation around this house at dinner time. Are we having
so I guess like is dessert a pretty normalized part of your family's day, or I would want to learn a little bit more about your own beliefs and preferences around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, sometimes we have it and that we'll let them pick something, and sometimes we don't. And it depends on the day. Like, it depends on if we went and got ice cream that afternoon, I'm not going to be like, yeah, then let's have some more sugary stuff before bed.
Sure. Yeah. So assuming that the kids are, have normalized behaviors and are on, healthy growth and all of that, I think you just set up the expectation like you would with anything else, is like, hey guys, just so you know, we're going to go out for ice cream after dinner today, or, because we had a treat earlier, that's going to be our dessert for the day. So the more that you can get ahead of it, I think and this is true for anything, right? Like dessert or just iPad time or whatever it is. I think we set kids up for better emotion management when they know the expectation ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can talk about foods as like, these are foods that are like great to have as much as you want. And these are foods that are more occasional treats. We have them on occasion. We enjoy them. It's important to have them sometimes. But this is how we would normally eat these foods. And so you're just having dialogue that's neutral about the food. It's kind of like, because it's dessert, I think we sometimes have, biases about that, but like, it's really no different than like, having like sleeping with your iPad next to you. Like that just might not be as a family something that you would want and encourage. And so we just talk about like, this is how we use our iPad. These are ways that as a family, we're going to use technology. And so it's kind of it's a lifestyle behavior that you would teach and model in the way that fits with your values. But the main thing is you're not identifying that as like that's bad for you, or you shouldn't have that, or we're never going to have that. Those are more I would say more higher risk type of messages about foods.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about talking about it? And we've done a fair amount of like, this gives you this kind of energy, or this would give you this kind of energy. Like, you need something that's going to give you some energy that's going to last a while rather than
Yep.
something you like. Dessert energy is wild and crazy and for a little while and then it's gone. So like you need some protein or you need some whatever to help you have energy that lasts longer. Is that like
Yeah, I love
a
that. I think that's
good way
great.
to okay.
Yeah, because that's what food is it's energy, and there's
Mhm.
every food does something different for our body, and that's why we need all foods. And so yeah, like certain foods we just want to have more of. And again, like as younger kids, like parents are still going to be the main um, sources of plating your kids' food and providing them with the variety, so that just simply through they're learning, what does a meal look like, what should my snacks look like if your kids are going to grab like a container of Pringles for their snack, like that's then on you as a parent to be like, I'm like, here's a snack we can have after school, and it's going to have some Pringles, it's going to have some yogurt and a cheese stick. Like though that is a good full meal that has variety. It's the same as if my daughter just grabbed like a handful of strawberries. Great. Love strawberries. That's not enough. You need to also have some, crackers and some applesauce with it or something, right? And so like regardless of the food, we want it to be variety and make satisfy and lead to fullness.
I feel like we're both in this like rocked schemas place where we're like, I'm computing so much and I
Mhm.
cannot output all like the questions that I have.
And you know what? Here's the thing. This is what I'll tell parents, and I will reassure myself that like the research does strongly suggest that parents inherently know what their children need to grow and develop. So if your kids are on track, you're clearly feeding them in the way that their body needs, right? Like if they're functioning and their growth is on track. If their growth isn't on track, it's likely the majority probably isn't even related to you as a parent. It's other factors like maybe they have some fears developing, or they have been really active, or they got the stomach flu for 2 weeks and that really threw off their appetite. So it's rare that I would ever really like talk to a parent even one-to-one about the things they're doing wrong. It's more about what do we need to like just support normal behaviors around food. And a lot of times parents do that. And it's just there's a lot of factors. It's like we can only plant seeds as parents, and a lot of the other factors are out of our control. And so most parents do well and definitely enough in terms of nourishing their kids.
That's so good to hear. I don't know if you could tell by the title of the show, but we have some anxiety about supporting our children enough.
Yes, I do too. I mean, I do this work all the time. It's the same with things like the second my daughter's like, "Oh, I'm afraid of this." I'm like, "What do we need to do to face that fear?
Yeah.
We need to have a behavior plan and get you on track." So, yeah, like there's some of this is it's just being a parent, having kids. Kids have things come up. Yeah, and you kind of have to roll with it. And then if it's like I don't know what the heck to do, then your job as a parent, ask for help, and then there is someone who could help. And yeah, it takes a whole community.
That's another like consistent thing we're hearing is like ask for help. You cannot
Yes.
do this all on your own. Especially
Mhm.
when we're talking about something that is so very specific and you need a very specific type of as many trainings, a lot of knowledge behind something like eating
Mhm.
disorders or disordered eating that you
Sure.
ask for help.
Especially in kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Hence the unicorn. Like that's why we say
Yeah.
hard enough to get eating disorder support. It's
Yeah.
hard to get support therapeutically for kids. To get that together,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, definitely. My daughter loves unicorns, so she will be thrilled that I am one, apparently.
You are a unicorn princess warrior therapist.
mhm, mhm.
Oh man.
Yeah, this
That's
is
how we should have
so
introduced you.
I'll re-record your intro with a proper like royal, the trumpets blaring. Very. We really need people to know what kind of specialized training it really does take, and the knowledge that like we as like the average parent is not going to know all of this stuff, and that it's okay to ask for help. And
Yes. Yeah. I would say even, yeah, and a lot of clinicians and doctors don't necessarily know all the, the intricacies of, especially with kids and teens. It's just their needs are so different, right? Yeah.
Yep. So true. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, and really hoping, I mean, we're really hoping that this can help bring some awareness, but also just validating and normalizing parents' experiences. And hopefully this can bring up, for if anybody's wondering, maybe it settles some anxiety, or it's something where they go, okay, this is something we need to look into. And Megan Cunningham is someone we can go to, or, that there are professionals that can support you and your family through this.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
It's been fun.
So good. It's been fun. We just love learning.
I love it all so much.
Yeah.
I do. And sometimes I get like I feel like I'm a little stunned today, and I'm just like,
I know.
I have all these things to like I need to just sit quietly for a few minutes. Let it all seep in. Like there's just so many things that I'm like, oh, okay. I don't have to be like so worried about this, or I can work on this or whatever. Like there's just a lot, and I love gathering all this information, and hopefully it's helpful for people.
Yes. Sometimes I'll joke with families that parenting is like a game of whack-a-mole, where like the second you get one, it's like, oh, a new problem, a new concern, a new issue, a new fear. And it's just, you're constantly, right? Like you're constantly parenting. And I guess that's the point.
So true. So true. If you're listening and you like this content and you want to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple. We're also on YouTube now because we worked really hard for like 6 weeks.
So tech savvy.
So obviously, again, this is 5-star content, so give us 5 stars.
Obviously.
So follow us and give us 5 stars.
Oh my gosh. All right.
Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, Facebook and Instagram. Yeah.
We actually do okay at those.
Yeah, we do. Because we're hilarious.
We already had them, so we kind of do what we're doing. But did we Google how to make a TikTok? Yeah, we did.
We did. And it took both of us. So. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will be back next week with some content for you.
Bye.
Bye.